Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It's Way T Lightheart from Bioptimizers with another edition of the Awesome Health Podcast. And today we are going to talk about mindset. And joining us today from the other side of the planet, the land of down under, we have none other than Brett Robinson. And I want to talk a little bit about Brett's background. We're going to get into it. He's a performance coach. He's a holistic well-being specialist, a podcast, a father, and an optimistic lover of life. He's an addict, but not the one that you think of as shooting up on the street. He's addicted to gratitude, and he has a lifetime experience in high-performance sport. He's a former sprinter at the Australian Institute of Sport. And the beautiful thing, he's been able to travel the world living his dream as a high-performance sporting teams, performance therapist, sprints coach, strength and conditioning coach, and treating and coaching world record holders and Olympic and Paralympic champions. Now, he's very similar to myself, started in an isolated town, little country down in Australia called Cobar, small population. It was a great way to build some deep core values with his friends and his family and things like that. But the bottom line is he's got a great attitude. As we were talking before the show, he's living the dream. But more importantly, we're going to talk a lot about perspective and mindset. I think so much is focused on athletic performance and get this level and do this thing and achieve these goals and all that sort of stuff. And we can oftentimes lose ourselves and all that sort of stuff, but Brett's figured it all out. Listen to his podcast. It's great. Brett, welcome to the show.
Wade, thank you so much. I'm super grateful to be here. And like you said at the start, I am addicted to gratitude because it makes me feel good. And hearing your voice and your optimism and your energy also makes me feel good. So thanks for having me, and thanks to all the listeners.
Yeah, great to have you on the show. And I guess before we get started into mindset and how important that is, and I love, you have a favorite quote of mine, which is from Gandhi in the background here, is be the change you want to see in the world. Of course, for those of you listening on the video or watching on the video, you see that. Those listening, you're not going to see that. So I just want to share that. Tell us the backstory of how you became so focused on mindset and gratitude. And I think there's some really devastating things that's transpired in your life, I would say, that's initiated that. And one of the things I've noticed more often than not is oftentimes people who've had some really tragic things happen to them end up having the best attitudes in life. Can you talk a little bit about your backstory, how you got to where you are, how did you become a performance coach, and then how did you get this whole mindset component down?
As he said in the intro, I grew up in a small country town and then went to the Australian Institute of Sport as a sprinter. And in Australia, rugby league is one of the football codes that's really strong. So I had the opportunity to either choose sprinting or rugby league. So sport was just in my blood, in my DNA, in my everyday love and desire. And I often warn people when I'm presenting these days when I start to draw, because I'm a terrible drawer, I'm a terrible artist, I can't fix things. I used to beat myself up and think I was dumb and hopeless and everything like that because I wasn't creative at all. It wasn't until later in life realizing that my creative outlet was actually my mind and my sport. So being heavily involved in sport and then getting into Paralympic sport as a performance therapist and traveling the world with different Paralympic teams, wheelchair rugby, the winter snow ski program, track and field, and did that for 7 years. I'm working with Australian football teams, and then went into full-time coaching. So I was a sprints and jumps and strength and conditioning coach, predominantly once again with the Paralympic track and field team and also across other sports. So for the last few years, I've been out on my own as a performance coach and working not just with elite athletes now, but working across the domains of mental, emotional, and physical well-being, working with all humans and a lot with kind of business people and entrepreneurs, people with highly stressful jobs who need to understand the foundational elements of what it means to thrive as a human. I mean, we all do, and that's why I love working with everyone, but also honing in on the performance aspect and realigning that. But my attitude around mindset and my optimism and my addiction to gratitude, I've said I've always been an optimistic lover of life. I've just loved being around people, loved attacking life, loved trying to get the best out of me. And then as I got into performance therapy and coaching, I love to try and get the best out of other people, and just having an understanding of the importance of linking it all together. And growing up in that small country town has played a big part of it, because we, 5,500 people, the nearest town was a couple of 100 kilometers away. So we're forced to know everyone, and there's a lot of independence. There's a lot of close mateships. There's a lot of time with family, and it's amazing. Like it really does create that bond within. And my grandparents were just super close to me. They were young grandparents, super active. And, I used to train with them. I used to travel with them. My grandfather became my sprints coach through high school. He didn't know anything about sprinting, but he could see that if he didn't take me on board, I would probably fall in the rut of beer drinking and working in the mines, which was the culture within the small town. And he took me on board, and I credit him. He got me to the Australian Institute of Sport and kept me in alignment with my goals and visions around that. And my grandparents just, they taught me a lot about business and entrepreneurship. They had a lot of businesses. They taught me a lot about love and respect. They were always cuddling and kissing and smiling and whispering sweet nothings into each other's ears. And through their actions and behaviors, they taught me what love is. And I'm super grateful for all of that. My grandfather wasn't just my coach, he was my idol and my best friend. And, when you grow up with people like that in your life, they become a part of you. And a lot of my thought processes around decisions I would make would be based around their influence in my life. My parents are very loving and caring as well. But my grandparents had this special connection and special bond and special drive in my life. And unfortunately, in 2015, those two of the most influential and inspirational humans in my life, my grandparents, they were murdered in their own home back in Cobar. And it was by their own son, so my uncle.
Wow.
So as you can imagine, that just, I'd never faced real adversity before. I'd never had any challenges. I'd never lost anyone close to me. And I just spiraled mentally and emotionally. At this stage, I was a full-time coach at with the Australian Institute of Sport and based in Sydney at that time. And I was actually in America at the time doing an internship in Phoenix, and it just rocked me to some deep, dark, emotional places that I didn't even know could exist. And all of a sudden, that optimistic addiction to gratitude type life, it was kind of just swept out from underneath me. And it really hit the whole community, because they were such big community members. There was almost 3,000 people at their funeral in a small country town of 5,500. And it rocked our whole family for a long time. And it took me a long time to get through it. And, I was working, it was about a month later, I was working with a psychologist from the Institute of Sport. And she said to me, I was explaining everything, never lost anyone close to me before. And she said, Robbo, so people in Australia have nicknames. People call me Robbo, Robinson for short. She said, Robbo, it sounds like part of your life has ended. And I said, I hadn't thought about it like that, but yeah, I guess you're right. And then talking about it a bit more. And then she said to me, you're going to be more of a whole person after going through this, because I'd explained I'd never lost anyone before. She said, you're going to become more of a whole person after going through this. And I remember just head down, tears in my eyes, and I processed what she said. And then I slowly looked up and I looked at her, and I had this massive smile on my face. And I said, Kate, that is the best thing that anyone could have ever said to me. Because every day, all I think about doing is trying to be a little bit better version of myself, so I can help the people around me be a better version of themselves. So if I have to look at this situation, the shittest situation in my life, this devastating situation in that way, then that's exactly what I'm going to do. And that was a turning point for me, where it started to help me understand the power of shifting my mindset. And I'd realized that I'd been the victim and stuck in the poor me. And I was very angry and frustrated and resentful, as you can imagine, with it was quite a messy situation. And from that point, I just started to think about it differently and thinking, well, okay, so this is making me a stronger person. This is making me a whole person. And, this hasn't happened to me. It's happened for me. And understanding those mindset shifts. And, it wasn't magic overnight, but it just started to change my way. And, because I was turning up to coaching with my athletes, and I was there, but I wasn't there. I was there physically, but I wasn't there mentally and emotionally. And all of a sudden I started to learn these tools through this psychologist. And I rang her up one day, a couple of months after we'd been working together. And I said, Kate, I've just realized I'm a coach, and we use strategies and processes and techniques with people. And I just realized you're obviously using something with me. What's it called? Because it's working and I love it. And she laughed and she said, it's called acceptance and commitment therapy. And I said, all right, who wrote the books? Where do I start? How do I research more about this? And she laughed and she said, okay, I think you're ready for the first step. Just start with this book called The Happiness Trap from Dr. Russ Harris. So I started with that book, and that was the trajectory then around learning more about human behavior from that deeper level of understanding the mental and emotional linkages, and not just the physical and mental approaches. And that really took me on the trajectory, and I started learning. So I did the courses with Dr. Russ Harris and did acceptance and commitment therapy, did other neuro-linguistic programming, other mindset coaching, and just really broadened everything from my own learning and growth through that adversity, but then also seeing how I can use that substantially and with depth with my athletes and then the people around me. And all of a sudden I was able to be that shift from that victim mentality and that victim mindset and that poor me and that frustration and anger back to that optimism and that gratitude. So shifting from resentful of what had happened to grateful for the time that I'd had with them, and just understanding the energetic shift from within, and then how that was perspiring with my goals and visions in my life, and how that was working with the athletes that I was working with and Paralympic and Olympic champions. And, I say I used to be addicted to human performance, because that's what sport is all about. I was an athlete. I was a performance therapist. I was a performance coach, and it was all about performance, addicted to performance. And now I say I'm actually addicted to human behavior, because I understand that leads to human performance.
Great. It's a great story. Of course, obviously tragic, but yet finding the gold nuggets within tragedy. And I know on my own self, when my sister died at an early age, and I went through that at 18, she was 4 years my senior. And, traditionally people are like, oh, that's horrible. She had this cancer. It was a traumatic, horrific thing. And similarly, there's an anger and a frustration that comes up. And I'm sharing this with our listeners because oftentimes they see people who are, world-renowned athletes, or they're, who's who in the business cell, or they're in a position of authority or excellence or whatever, or they have a great attitude and they think, oh, well, bad things don't happen to them, or their life is perfect, or all that. And that's just not the case. I think the Buddha said it 2,500 years ago that, suffering is inevitable. It's part of the human condition. We all suffer from old age. We all suffer from disease, and eventually we suffer from death. And so many people see that as a tragedy, as opposed to radically accepting that and recognizing that every time that I see somebody, my friends, my loved ones, whoever, that I'm one step closer to the last time. And that's one of the things I learned. And what it allowed me to do is to bring back to the presence of the quality of what's happening when I'm seeing somebody. And so going through the traumatic phase, and I think there's a disease that is spreading around the world, and it's victimitis. It's like it's a competing narrative for who can be the biggest victim, who can have the historical aspect, or like, it's just gotten insane. If you look back the history of every human on the planet, we can see horrific components that all of our ancestors were suffered. You know, rape, war, violence, theft, murder, disease, dysfunction, oppression. I mean, it's the history that we've all inherited as humans, which there's another side to it. Somehow we made it. Somehow we're here as the result of somebody pushing through that from 10,000 generations and beyond. How was it that, obviously having that influence, how has that mindset component for you influenced your life, your coaching, and what you do, and what have you seen from going through that dark place and then coming out the other side, quote unquote, a more whole person?
Yeah, and I would say that I'm out the other side as more of a whole person, but I also often think about, well, at the moment, that's the worst thing that's happened in my life. Doesn't mean other tragedies won't come along. Doesn't mean other challenges won't come along. So when I start to feel myself that I'm like, life is amazing, abundant, grateful like it is right now, I don't go and sabotage myself because of that knowledge. I just remember that's why I keep up with all the tools that I've learned. That's why I keep up with all the mindfulness, the breathing, the gut health and gut-brain connection, like you guys are the experts in, making sure that I'm living optimally. So when the next challenge or adversity comes along, I'm ready. I'll go through the stages of what's necessary, but I won't let it bury me, and I won't sabotage myself by thinking that, by going back into victim mindset, like you said, like a lot of us can do. But in answer to your question, another big part of it is, before this happened, working my whole career with Paralympic athletes. And when I was a sprinter at the AIS, I was training alongside Paralympic athletes. So these are guys that, you know, have experienced major adversity personally. And what I learned about spending a lot of time with these kind of athletes is there is a lot of people in the world with disabilities. There is a lot of talented people who become disabled through injury or illness. So working with some people with meningococcal who would lose their limbs, or some people would be car accidents and become quad or paraplegics, or farming accidents and amputees, whatever it might be. What I learned is the difference between the ones who became Paralympic athletes and even Paralympic champions compared to people who with a disability. The ones who focused on what they did have, not focusing on what they don't have anymore, not focusing on what they can't do anymore. They focused on, so they accepted this adversity in their life. They accepted that life is different now. And then they focused on, okay, what have I got now? And what can I move forward with? Is that no legs? Okay, what can I do with prosthetics? Is that I'm a quadriplegic now? So I worked a lot with quadriplegics. Okay, so this is where I'm at. It's freaking tough. It sucks. Yes, I'm missing out on things, but the more they focused on, this is what I can do. I can push the chair around. I can get this help. They're the ones who stayed mentally and emotionally in control enough to be able to do the daily tasks, ticking off, going through, just having the habits and rituals that were empowering and serving them, that enabled them to build the building blocks towards their success, as opposed to when we focus. So looking at the athletes with a disability who focused on all the things that they couldn't do anymore, and they slipped into that victim mentality, the poor me, the blame, the guilt. And I realized that that was a determining factor, that it was a lot. Yes, obviously skill and talent was a part of it, but a massive part of it was the mind of what they were focusing on a regular basis. So I stepped away from that and looked at my personal life and the people around me. And that's what I've taken now into performance coaching now with everybody that I work with. You have to acknowledge the challenges, the adversity, but if we're not accepting it and then focusing on what we can control now moving forward, then what we're wasting our energy on is actually holding us back. And what we're wasting our energy on is allowing us to sort of slip and shift into that victim mentality and what I call the disempowering side of, I have this quadrant that I work through with people. And with that, understanding that, it becomes a part of the game of life is becoming very aware of that. So because we will get triggered into the frustration, the resentment, the victim mindsets. That's part of the human experience, whether it's the COVID, whether it's the weather, whether it's people around you, lots of different things in our external environment will trigger us into that. And the longer we stay there, the less able we are to move in the trajectory that will help and serve us. So we start to get stuck in those states.
Really, really well said. Could you break down maybe what you've noticed, particularly, there's probably people listening to this that are going through some tragic or challenging situation or almost hopeless, or one that makes you kind of question your soul, go through the dark night of the soul or whatever. Is there some tips that you've learned from working with these individuals or from your own experience that you think could offer some insight of how to address someone that might be going through a challenge right now?
The first tip is that I acknowledge that everyone experiences adversity very differently. So there's no linear, there's the steps that people can go through, but I believe there's no linear approach. So, some key elements to it are support. So if you don't have family support around you, understanding that there is ways to get that support online and through the telephone. And that's a really big part of it. We're never on our own. We might think that we have to do things on our own, but we're never on our own. So support is a massive part of it. It depends on what phase they're into. If it's the initial phase, there's such an emotional roller coaster that you don't know how it's going to present themselves. But as we move through time, like I said, the biggest thing for me to begin with, and what I see with people, is that mindset shift. The mindset shift comes with acceptance. So the first piece of the puzzle, I've worked with some of the world's best sports psychologists, some of Australia's best positive psychologists, and human behavior experts. And they all talk about the fact that without acceptance, we can't truly move forward, because if we're not accepting, we're kind of resisting or denying. And the opposite to resistance is, what we resist will persist. So if we're not accepting the fact that things are different, what's happened, then we can't go to the next piece. So we talk about working through the acceptance, and that true acceptance, not just saying it of, oh yeah, I accept that it's happened, whatever. And then you're still stuck in that denial or that blame or that guilt. That's not enough. You have to truly feel in that acceptance.
And now for a Bioptimizers fixed digestion tip: supercharge your protein shake. Everyone knows protein shakes are a great way to sneak in extra protein, build more muscle, even replace meals and burn more fat. The problem is the highest quality protein typically absorbs at around 40%. One way to fix this and dramatically increase how quickly and effective your protein shake digests is to add 2 to 3 capsules of masszymes into your shake. One research study showed that pre-digested protein during a meal increased muscle growth significantly. To take advantage of this, just blend the open capsules into your shake, and within 15 minutes or less, the enzymes will have begun to break down the protein into amino acids. This can make your shakes at least 2 to 3 times more potent. Some people do this and sip on their shake while lifting to provide their muscles with a steady stream of amino acids during their workout. To save 10% on masszymes, use the code SHAKE10, that's SHAKE10, at masszymes.com. That's SHAKE10 at masszymes.com.
What does that mean by, like, just to dive into that? Because I think a lot of people can skim over that, but this is a very critical component. At what point, like, what is the earmarks that you've truly embraced acceptance, kind of like on a, cellular or soul level, as opposed to, hey, yeah, I accept it kind of thing. You know what I mean?
This is where somatic intelligence comes into it, which means the intelligence to feel what you're feeling. So when you accept something, you create that openness. You feel it within yourself that you're not tense, you're not resisting, you're not trying to defend, even internally or externally through your words. So that acceptance piece is almost like there's the saying that we've taken the weight off the shoulders. You just feel that little bit lighter. It doesn't make anything different about you physically if you've had physical trauma. It doesn't change the rules and the laws around COVID. It doesn't bring people back that have passed away. What it does is it opens some neural pathways. It creates, you start to almost tap into that liminal space between your conscious and subconscious mind again, where we can start to really do the deep work. So the acceptance is just that feeling of, okay, this is different. I'm ready. Ready for what? I'm just ready to be open. Okay, I'm ready now. And that'll feel different for everyone. Some people listening to that will realize, oh, okay, I get it. And some people might still not get it. And the work is to keep questioning yourself, well, have I accepted it? Am I ready to move on? Or am I still choosing? What am I thinking about the most? This was a big one for me, where I realized the acceptance piece came when I stopped thinking about the tragedy. I stopped thinking about the hatred and the anger. And I started to think about my gratitude for the time that I had with them. I started to think about how I can utilize this point in time as a stepping stone to help me and help people around me. So just thinking a little bit differently about the situation, about myself and those steps forward made me realize, okay, now I've truly accepted, when we start to shift those processes.
Okay. And then the next step after kind of acceptance.
The acceptance moves into the awareness. So I look around the AAA battery method, which is what I call it. So AAA. So the awareness, the acceptance. No, sorry, my bad. The awareness is actually before that, because we've got to be aware of, we're aware of that. So that's the noticing of the fact that we are victims, the noticing of our mindset and our thought processes and our actions that are hindering us as opposed to helping us. So it's the awareness of all that. And then the acceptance opens things up.
And then that support, that's where the support person or persons or group or whatever is kind of providing that insight to kind of really where you're at, giving you that feedback, and then helping you kind of move into that next position of true acceptance versus resistance or victimology.
Exactly right. Absolutely.
Okay.
And then it's from there that we then start to, it's the awareness and acceptance. It's almost, it goes hand in hand, obviously, but it's if we're not aware of how our emotions are disempowering us, how our mindsets are holding us back and putting us in, as you say, the victimology, then without that awareness of how it's hindering our life and the people around us, then we're not going to be able to make the change. Without awareness, we don't know what we need to change.
Right.
So the awareness, the acceptance, and then the third piece is the action. And this is where the action is different for everybody. So the action could be that, is it the breath work? So I do a lot of breath work with people because we can change and we can tap into our emotional well-being and shift energy through certain types of breath work. Is the action then that we are taking other steps forward, like learning more about it? Is the action then shifting the mindsets? Is the action then to engage in community groups? Whatever that action might be that the support people around you are helping you with, is that action then to get back into it? A lot of people through tragedy and adversity will stop doing the things that actually made them feel good before. So like exercise, like serving themselves through their nutrition, through their mindset, like being around people that lift them up. They start to want to shelter more. So the action steps can be about just reminding themselves what lights them up again and starting to go through those processes.
Yeah, that's good. I think a lot of that's so true is it's so easy to kind of disassociate because the pain sometimes is so deep, and it's almost like it takes up, we have a term, it takes up so much mental RAM that you seek out sort of escapes, whether that's eating or drinking or drugging or some sort of behavior that kind of disassociates from the current pain, and then getting away from the things that are the foundation of kind of healthy, optimized living. So it's a kind of, it's almost like it's a trigger event that on one set is counter productive for health, but on another set, going to that wholeness allows you to kind of plumb the depths of the dark side of one's psychology. And I think it was Carl Jung who said that you don't really know yourself until you've actually fully explored the darkness within yourself. And I think in today's kind of mamby-pamby world of what is it called? It's kind of like pseudo spirituality. It's like, I'm going to do this meditation and I'm going to be rich and famous and powerful and live my perfect life, and everything's kind of Facebook polished and curated and everything's amazing. There's a deep, deep avoidance of going into there and understanding the what we all have to face inside our psychology. So it seems like this is part of the process. Would you say that's accurate?
Absolutely. And I'll refer back to that book that was a turning point for me too, The Happiness Trap. When my psychologist put me onto that, I thought, awesome, this is going to be so inspirational. I'm going to love it. And I was reading it, and it's one of those books that takes you on the journey where you have to do and it was all about going back and experiencing to work through the emotions. So it took me deep, and I still can vividly remember being in my lounge room, dark nights, just in tears, like the situation had just happened again, because it's just going through and clearing the emotions and going through this kind of work. And that's what you're saying, like going into that darkness as opposed to trying to avoid it when we feel a little bit of the pain. Oh, I don't want to go there. What is that? Actually, when this all happened, my grandparents were killed they were shot by their son, and so murdered and shot. And I immediately stopped watching TV or listening to the radio, because the last thing I wanted to hear were the words murder and shotgun, because I didn't want to even think about where that might take me. And it was ages later that I said it to my psychologist, and she pulled me up on that and said, when do you ever think that it's going to get easier? What are you waiting for? Where do you think that's going to take you when you hear those words? And I said, I actually don't know. I don't want to know. And she said, how long do you want to live your life avoiding things that might have words in them that might trigger you based on you don't even know what it's going to do to you? And so working through that, and I thought, you're right. I don't want to live in fear. I'm not going to let this, because that might turn into another thing that I want to avoid because I'm afraid of that pain. So it was then all of a sudden stepping into that pain and turning the radio back on again and watching the news, which I hated anyway. And I haven't owned a TV for the last 4 years and haven't watched the news for, that long anyway, but that just exposing myself to it again. And sorry, that's not why I don't watch the news. It's for other reasons. I just don't think it's very helpful at all. I expose myself to the things that lift me up. But that was then stepping into that pain and stepping into that, letting it take me down and understanding it. And okay, so when I do feel that, because it did trigger me, it triggered a bit of anger and a lot of sadness again. Instead of avoiding that, okay, just feel it and process it. And the more I did that, the less apparent it was, the less I was. And then also now openly, obviously I can talk about it. Whereas before it was very much, or maybe I shouldn't talk about it because I don't know how it will make me feel. I see that transpire across every human that I work with in some capacity. If there's an avoidance, that's like the opposite to the acceptance. If they haven't gone there and experienced what it's going to be like, of course they don't want to expose themselves to it in other areas. So it becomes, a lot of the mindset work that I do with people is actually about getting out of the head. So people think about, I talk about shifting positive, or not positive language, but helpful and empowering thought processes and mindset shifts. But a lot of the time it's the meditation, it's the mindfulness, it's the breath work to really get out of our head, because our mind, 40 to 70,000 thoughts every day, it gets bloody busy up there. And the busier it gets, the harder it is to focus on what's important. The mind becomes a distraction. I talk about these days, a lot of the work that we do is to help people just push those distractions away because the world is full of them, and also understand the ones that are internally that are distracting also, and really just compartmentalizing and filtering through that. And so the less noise we have going on in our head, and the work that we do with the Calm Mind Co is we say calm mind, resilient life. People want resilience, but we make irrational, illogical, reactive decisions from a busy mind. We make rational, logical, great decisions, and we respond to situations from a calm mind. So calm mind, resilient life.
Very, very well articulate and understand. And so let's flip the switch a little bit on that, and let's talk about what you've experienced on the other side of that and how that's become, transformative, and how that works into your coaching work and what you've been able to accomplish and share with other people in the world of performance and life optimization and all these kind of things that you do. What's been the golden nuggets that have been mined out of this experience?
Well, where to begin? There's so many. I think the greatest one is perspective, obviously. So understanding, I love the saying by Wayne Dwyer, change the way you look at things and the things you look at change.
Yeah.
So now personally in business, I was employed full time working in high performance sport, and then saw a greater opportunity, and also did some work to align and understand my deeper purposes and mission in life. And so the job that I was doing, that I was extremely passionate about, coaching Paralympic champions, working with Olympians, I realized that it was actually the ceiling that was keeping me, working full time in high performance sport was actually preventing me from moving more in alignment with my true visions and values and missions and purpose. So taking that shift in the middle of 2017, at a time where my athletes had won Paralympic gold medals and broken world records. I got Paralympic Coach of the Year. I was working with some amazing Olympic athletes at the time, and took that shift. And now in this world where you would understand, when you work in your own company, in your own business, and you're growing in that way, there's a lot of challenges, there's a lot of opportunities, but there's a lot of challenges. And that good old monkey mind can really just jump on top of you and make you feel small. And I always talk about the comparison mindset. I love that saying, that comparison is the killer of all joy, because as soon as I start comparing myself to other performance coaches, I start to feel disheartened, and I start to judge myself internally without even realizing it. I'll just be, feeling a little bit depleted, and then realize, okay, so I'm looking at these other performance coaches. Instead of being inspired, my mind is telling me that I'm not as good as they are because I'm not working with the people that they are. So I just catch that. So that's the awareness. I accept, okay, I'm human. I let my mind go there. And the action is shift that straight away into, I'm inspired. I'll learn what they're learning. I'll do the extra work, or I'm inspired to know that that opportunity exists. So changing the way that I look at things, and the things I look at change, it becomes an opportunity as opposed to a challenge. So perspective is huge in that way. What I would also say is understanding that openness and moving towards things. It got me down the trail of where you guys are experts in around gut health and gut-brain connection. I realized that I was making choices around, I wanted to try keto. I can't say it was keto, but high fat, low carb, for example. And I loved the idea of it. And I was kind of lying to myself that it was working really well for me when I did it, because I was having massive energy dips. I was getting these random itches in my joints, and couldn't put two and two together, but because I was just telling myself, this is awesome, mental clarity. Everything I was choosing to listen to and read was all about the benefits of it, but it obviously wasn't serving me. So it took me down the path to start working with a functional medicine practitioner, doing the deeper tests, understanding my gut microbiome, the gene testing, understanding I actually don't process fats very well, so it wasn't serving me at all. So just that openness to dive into those pain points again, that reminder when I would come to working with people and helping them step into the darkness. And then I would reflect and asking myself the questions a lot these days of, where am I lying to myself right now? Or where am I not being truthful to myself? And just finding those little elements and then, oh, okay, so that's actually not fully serving me. What is it that I'm avoiding? And then stepping into that. Honestly, that's a huge one, because that's a really hard thing to do with those small elements in life. And when we look at habit change and the daily rituals that we have, and understanding that they contribute to our quote unquote success, or they contribute to us feeling stuck or holding us back in any way. Working with people to help them optimize their lives, it's looking at all of those key elements and just understanding the different approaches. So one key thing, like I said, was I used to be all about positive psychology, positive terminology, positive mindsets, positive thoughts. And I thought that's why I was an optimistic lover of life. But then realizing that that's actually, I could be really frustrated, really angry, really resentful, and putting a positive thought in my mind is not going to help. That's the times when learning to get out of my head and learning the deep work and the meditation and the breath work. So in answer to that question as well, one of the gold elements that it's led me to is around breath work, understanding the mind-body connection and how we do that through the breath, and studied a lot of things, Heart Math Institute, one of my greatest mentors here, doing a lot of breath hold work as well, and just exploring all of those elements, doing some shamanic breath work and the cycle breathing, and going into the somatic intelligence and understanding more around that. So when I work with, whether it's athletes, performance executives, or stay-at-home parents, the breath is the link, the major piece to the puzzle that helps with everything. I worked in high performance sport my whole career, so I look back at that and think, wow, I should have known everything about breathing. But we didn't really learn much about breathing at all, not even around its efficiency to the maximum point. And I look at the world and expanding now around breath work, and I think the people from above must be looking down and just having a laugh and thinking, I can't believe that it took this long for so many humans to understand the power and the importance of breathing and how that links everything together and helping them through their challenges. So I feel like everything that I'm doing now is kind of, like you said, where does that go to now? It's changed my perspective and my skill of awareness and acceptance to move through life in that way, to become more open and aware. I really love learning from other people now because, well, not now, I always have, but there's always, you never stop learning, right? Knowledge isn't power, applied knowledge is power. So when I feel like I'm coaching a lot of the same sort of things to people, I understand that's because that's what they need. But then I think, what's next? What else are we missing? What else can be helping there? And that's, to be honest, when I was exposed to you guys, understanding the power of the digestion aspects, like I said, my experience around the high fat and it not serving me. So I thought, okay, so carbs is my fuel. But now understanding a little bit more around the fact that we can actually support that through great supplements and good supplement protocols. So now I'm kind of really keen to explore that a lot more to understand, all right, what's next around this space that I've been missing out on.
So well articulated and orchestrated. Let's talk about, there's so much of it. I think that was very impactful and very practical in your application. So I guess the next thing we're going into mindset is, how do you continue to keep the balance between routine and integration of new things as part of your mindset? Like, is there a rule or ratio? Is there a practice? Like, what's a day in the life like? Or how is it that you're led to a new discovery?
Through experience, I've realized that I can very easily overwhelm myself in this technology age, listening to so many podcasts and audio books and doing programs and courses and just wanting to learn, realizing that I wasn't actually giving myself the time to apply what I had learned. So therefore, a lot of it was actually pointless from my perspective, because I was learning about it, but wasn't implementing and understanding how it can actually make change. So where I'm at now is that if I hear a recommendation, I won't just jump on it and go through it. I want to explore and just learn. And I ask myself the questions: how can I practice that? How can I implement that? What area of what I'm doing right now can that help bridge? So, and there'll be things where I look at it and say, I see the potential, but I'm not ready for it yet. So I need to create the space, as opposed to saying yes, learn about everything. It's saying no to some things and having one audio book on the go instead of 15, and just really accepting that. So for example, now it's the breathing. So I've been doing it for years, but got to a point where really understanding how to implement it to a lot of different areas and running it through my workshops with everyone, but now wanting to really dive deep and make sure that I am understanding the science at that deeper level, and also the expansiveness of it beyond what I thought I did. So now it's the one course, the one book, the one mentor at a time around that space to open me up. And like I said before, now being exposed to what you guys do, it's like, okay, that's an area that I'm willing to explore. Because I'm not overloaded and overwhelmed with everything else that's going on, it's created that time and that space and that awareness that's something that can add to that. Because I look at a lot of the things that I've used, and when, like the acceptance and commitment therapy, when I was going down that rabbit hole, that's all I was focused on, away from my sports coaching. And that was brilliant, and it got me to a great level. But then I sort of got to that point where then it was neuro-linguistic programming at the same time as deep state repatterning, at the same time as this, at the same time as that. And then that's when it gets a bit overwhelming.
All right. So I know that you run courses, you run training, you run events and these type of things. So can you talk a little bit about who they're for? How do they get a hold of you? How do they find out about these things that you're doing, where you're taking people through some of these processes?
Absolutely. So I guess the easiest place is my website, brettrobbo.com. And so BRETTROBBO.com. As I mentioned earlier, in Australia, we get nicknames very easily. My last name is Robinson, so that's where Robbo's come from. On the website, brettrobbo.com, you can find all the information on there. At different times, running different online programs and you know, for different levels. So there's the Thrive program that is laying the foundations, that's looking and exploring at everything. But more than that, I would say to people, you know, I've got my podcast, and the reason why I love referring people to that, and I'm sure it's the same passion behind you, is that on there, I'm picking the brains of other experts, including yourself, picking the brains of people from health, well-being, spiritual, all these different elements, so I can understand better. But then that's a great way for other people to learn about which rabbit hole they want to dive down. So the podcast is called yourlifeofimpact.com, and Your Life of Impact, and the .com used to be the website for it. And like I said, it's a great free resource, and would love to just hear from people. Anything I want to say too for the Bioptimizers community, for everyone that's listening, I will offer a discount to anyone for any programs that I'm running, for anyone that reaches out to me when they're on and says that they heard me on this podcast, because I want to encourage people to reach out. I love hearing from people. I love feedback. I love connecting with community and really hearing from people in that way. So if you're listening to this and you see when a program comes up at any stage at all, hold my word that I will create a discount for you guys as Bioptimizers community.
Thanks so much. Any social media handles that you like to use or anything like that?
Instagram is Brett Robbo 1 and Facebook is Brett Robbo.
Beautiful, sir. Brett, this is one of the most interesting pieces I think that we've done on the podcast recently. By the way, folks, I've listened to his podcast. It's very uplifting. It's very positive. And I think for a lot of people in this world, there's a struggling with acceptance. There's a tendency to avoidance or a tendency to anger. And for someone such as yourself, who has such a high level of performance and work with so many people in extraordinary adverse situations and going through an adverse experience yourself as a human, there's no one more qualified to speak on the matter and to really provide an insight. And so I'd like to commend you for your work, and I think that your grandparents would be very impressed with what you've done and how you've been able to honor their legacy and carry that forward. So thank you so much for being on the Awesome Health Podcast with Bioptimizers. For those who have been listening with us, it's another great episode. Reach out, check out Brett's podcast, check out what he's doing, because there's probably someone that you know in your life, or maybe someone in your family, or maybe you, that is avoiding something or is getting triggered by something or hasn't accepted a limitation, a tragedy, an experience in your life, and you haven't taken the opportunity to turn that to become a whole person. And Brett's your guy. Check him out. Brett Robinson, thank you for joining us on the Awesome Health Podcast. For those that are listening, thank you so much for joining, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you, Wade, and thank you, listeners. Super grateful.
And now for a Bioptimizers fixed digestion tip. Turn cultured foods into superfoods. Raw fermented foods like sauerkraut and low sugar live yogurt can be good for you, but rarely have enough of the right probiotic strains for therapeutic benefit. So here's a way that you can turn them into superfoods. What I do is I get some raw sauerkraut or a healthy yogurt. Ideally, it's grass-fed or coconut-based, and you can empty 3 caps of P3OM into a container and mix it up thoroughly. Leave it at room temperature for a couple of hours before putting it back into the fridge. And what's going to happen is these probiotic levels will be multiplied. In fact, it doubles every 20 minutes. And then what you're going to get is you're going to have a food with strong proteolytic activity. To learn more about P3OM and why its patented strains make it the strongest probiotic available, go to www.bioptimizers.com.
Thank you for listening to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. You can find more information at bioptimizers.com.